wanted to give you guys a chance to react to both his outlook about intervention. We should just let markets do what they want to do. But also it seems like the tactics he's taking are kind of similar in many ways to what you guys are taking in terms of your capital allocations. John, why don't we start with you with a reaction to that, and then we'll get to you, Mike.
I go back and I recall we watched this great documentary called Money for Nothing. It was done right after the housing crisis, and it was a great documentary. I think Jim Bruce was the producer.
Yeah, Bruce. We've actually had him on this program. Yeah.
Yep, it was a really, really good documentary. It had a bunch of interviews with Fed insiders, even some Fed chairs and former governors, plenty of very esteemed market strategists and historians and things like that. And one quote from that documentary, and I forget which Fed official, I think it was one of the chairs, it might have been Bernanke or Yellen, or I can't remember. But the quote was, "The boom is worth the bust." Almost as if to admit that they can't help but intervene to create booms, and then on the other side, force the bust in markets. I remember that putting a chill through my spine even back then. And that was even before what were then being talked about as temporary emergency measures became pretty much a permanent fixture that just got ramped up and up and up over the last decade plus.
Mike, let's come to you and let you chime in on that. And I guess maybe just comment to the fact that because of his concerns, Mike is going light on equities here, building dry powder. That's still more or less the mode you guys are in, correct?
Yeah, it is. And I remember that quote very well. That was Alan Greenspan's testimony to Congress. The boom is worth the bust. Alan Greenspan, who really started this whole notion of the Fed put. Alan Greenspan started as the Fed chair about 1 month before the crash in October 1987. That's really where I think the Fed interventionist or the loose monetary policy in response to financial markets started. And really, it only got worse from there. And once they learned that they could do this and get away with it, they couldn't stop. Every intervention was larger and larger. And I think not only can they really stop or even want to, because that kind of power is intoxicating, I don't think they're even allowed to stop at this point. I think that Congress probably leans on them to intervene if we have another financial crisis. And frankly, I think at this point, the public expects the Fed to bail them out. So it's just been this mission creep that's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't see any hope for them to stop doing what they're doing. They have one lever, one method of response, and that is to hit the easy button. And I think they're only going to do it faster and faster. And in terms of raising interest rates and tightening being policy error, I don't think that's policy error at all. I think policy error has been allowing this mission creep all of these years and decades. And frankly, they're just moving rates back to, what would be normal. If they were to completely step out of the market, who knows what would happen?
All right. Great answer there, Mike. Curious if you remember this, but you talked about the fact that we are, kind of getting into a year from what looks like to have been the all-time highs to date in the markets. Back prior to the 2008 market crash and then similar in 2001, there's a pretty big delay between the peak and then when things really took the elevator south. True?
In fact, I was looking at that the other day. I think in 2008, the S&P through some point in September, so almost, 3/4 of the year, was down about 20%. And then it was just in the next couple months, frankly, 2.5 months or so, that it fell another greater than 20%. The S&P was down over 40% in 2008. It only got down about 20% through September, and then accelerated the sell-off into the end of the year and then ultimately to the March 2009 low. But things happen fast, typically in the later stages of a final bear market low. What seemed like months in hindsight suddenly become days and weeks in the final leg of a bear market, typically.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd add is it is one of the largest, broadest tops in market history. Maybe it's because it's probably the largest bubble of our lifetimes. And there's an old saying on Wall Street, the bigger the top, the bigger the drop. So I'd just say be careful.
If Felix is right, how are you guys planning on positioning for that?
Okay, so first of all, there is this, I also have a belief that the Fed will pivot. The Fed will respond eventually to some kind of market event. I just think that the Fed put, or that floor, the line in the sand, is far lower than most people realize right now. It's impossible to predict, but I would imagine that the Fed put is somewhere below 3,000 on the S&P, which is a good bit down from here. That's just a guess. And the other thing, though, is that just because the Fed lowers interest rates again is not an absolute guarantee that the market's going to soar from there. I know that's been our experience in recent years, but there's other times back in 2000 to 2002 and leading up to the financial crisis in 2008 that the Fed was cutting rates, and yet the market fell during that time.
Yeah,
we had
sorry to interrupt, but just to reemphasize your point, in most cases like that, where the Fed has pivoted in a crisis, 2020 being the outlier here, it has taken the markets usually a quarter or two to bottoms. So if you're expecting, okay, pivot news was just announced today, I'm going to jump into stocks because they're going to zoom tomorrow, you very well may be set up for disappointment. It may take a lot longer before things to recover. So
what happens if the Fed cuts rates and the market drops further, or if the Fed cuts rates and the market bounces a little bit and everyone buys in anticipation and then it rolls over and panics from there? That causes an ultimate, or a pretty quick collapse. So it's not as easy as that. Just sit and wait for the Fed to pivot and let's all jump in. Don't forget we're in a hyper overvalued market by many different valuation metrics. You can prove that this is still the most expensive market ever, and frankly just sits at the tippity top of the previous bubbles. The last 25 years we've gotten used to these booms and busts that we're talking about, but we're relying on a permanently overvalued market, just so that everything stays together. So that's why we're kind of backed into a corner. The Fed has gone all in. They can't stop. They have to keep the market at this relatively permanent high plateau, but it's constantly prone to crash risk. And the market participants are very Pavlovian, looking for that pivot. I think there's a likelihood that the Fed starts to ease and the market goes down even despite that. Now, that would be a really scary moment.